Hi everyone, I'm Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. This series is brought to you by the Real Scientists Nano team. Our goal is to provide a platform where scientists can communicate their work and interact with the public. With that in mind, every week we introduce you to a scientist working in the field of materials or nanoscience, who tweets from the Real Scientists Nano Twitter account, which is realsci_nano.
Hi everyone. Today we have with us Chris Nicholson, who is a group leader at the Fritz Haber Institute of the Max Planck Society in Berlin, Germany. Hi Chris, how are you doing?
Hi Pranoti, very well, thanks. And I'm delighted to be here today with you.
Yay.
Thanks very much for having me on.
We are super happy to have you here, and let's take a deeper dive to get to know you more as a scientist and your science as well.
Okay.
So let's start at probably at the very beginning, or wherever you want to start, wherever your beginning is. So do tell us about your career journey so far, your scientific career so far.
Okay, so the serious part, let's say, started when I chose to go study physics back in my hometown. So I'm from Scotland originally, and I grew up in Edinburgh, but I decided to study physics in a little town just north of there called St Andrews, which is a beautiful little place right on the coast with a number of beaches. And it's quite famous mostly for golf, because that's apparently where golf was first started. And they have this very famous course there. And I'm not into golf myself, and that's not why I chose to go there, but it's somehow something that people know about it.
Okay.
Yeah, so I did my undergraduate studies there, and that got me in touch with the kind of physics that I've ended up doing longer term. So I did a couple of undergraduate projects during the summer, during my undergraduate days. And somehow in the end, that led to me being involved with this stuff called photoemission spectroscopy, which is what I do on the day-to-day level now. So when it came to the end of my time in St Andrews, I really wanted to go abroad. I knew this for a bit of time beforehand, but I wasn't totally sure where I wanted to go or where would be a good place to go. So I asked my supervisor at the time, and he very kindly sat me down and said, well, if you're interested in this kind of area of physics, there's a couple of people doing stuff in this place or that place. And one of the places that he pointed out was Berlin, and where there were people doing a version of photoemission spectroscopy which used very fast lasers to excite samples and then follow the dynamics following this excitation. And this kind of caught my interest. And so I decided to apply to the institute where this was happening in Berlin. And yeah, they invited me for an interview and to kind of have a chat with them, and I was very impressed by the kind of environment and the science that was happening there. So I decided to do my PhD in Berlin with those guys.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, at the end of my PhD, I was kind of wondering again, okay, well, what should I do now? And somebody who I'd actually worked with a bit during my PhD was starting his own group down in Switzerland, in a little town called Freiburg. And we chatted a bit and talked about some of the ideas that we both had for the future, and he offered me a position there for a couple of years. So I did my postdoc in Switzerland with him in Freiburg. And then not so long ago, I mean, I got an offer to come back to Berlin and to set up my own group here at the Fritz Haber Institute. So still looking at the electronic structure on this fast timescales. But of course, now with this experience from Switzerland and my PhD to build on. So that's kind of how I ended up here. When I say it like this, I want to kind of say it with the caveat that it was absolutely not planned out at the start that I would go this place and that place, and that I would do these things. It just kind of happened fairly organically as I followed my interests.
Okay.
So there we go.
Okay, so from a famous golf course, university, or college to now Berlin, then Switzerland, then back to Berlin. That's quite an interesting journey. That's really cool. So about your current research, so you mentioned that you recently moved back to Germany, to Berlin at the Fritz Haber Institute at the Max Planck Society. So your current research that you do, you already spoke about it. in the short podcast a bit. So, but what I want to understand is where does your current research fit in this big picture of materials for nanoscience? Which
Sure.
puzzle piece is it?
Yeah, so I put it mostly in the kind of materials category.
Mhm.
What I mentioned during the short podcast was this idea of electronic structure and emergent behavior. And so
Mhm.
those are the kind of big umbrellas that I'm interested in looking at.
Mhm.
Novel electronic behaviors and phases that occur in solid materials. And my own particular interest is on dynamic electronic structure. So how does that change? How does the electronic structure change? So the distribution of electrons and their behavior. How is that modified by ultra short laser pulses? And what happens once electrons are excited by an ultra short laser pulse? What happens to the energy? How does that distribute into other parts of the crystal? Does it change the behavior of a material from one phase to another? For example, does it change it from a metal to an insulator or the other way around? That's something that's absolutely possible with lasers. And so within this material science area, the goal is really to look at fundamental material behavior and to understand at a microscopic level the mechanisms that explain these behaviors that we see. So it's really getting at the nitty-gritty details of the electronic interactions within a crystal. And the hope, let's say, is that in the future one could use that knowledge and understanding of complex materials to design new behaviors that we could actually use in a practical way.
Okay, interesting. So if I have to oversimplify this, what one way of describing your current research would be that there is a material with electrons and everything. Then you shine a laser on it, and the electrons do something, either rearrange themselves or something happens, and you're able to study what this something is.
Yeah. So
Right?
what we're doing is basically taking a movie of what the electrons are doing in a material.
Right.
So imagine you have a sprinter doing a 100 meters race, but you only have a really slow camera. So you maybe take photographs of this sprinter at the start, during the race, and at the end. And at the end, you put all these pictures together, and you can build up a picture, like a movie of him running, him or her running.
Oh, that's a very good way of describing this.
And so what we're doing is the same with electrons. You
Right,
take them at the start, which is kind of like the starter gun,
right.
and then you take a picture at one particular time of what the electronic distribution is, and then you go to another time, you take another picture, and you keep doing that for many, many steps until you build up this dynamic movie of how it is the electrons are moving around and what they're doing with respect to each other.
That is so cool. Electron movie. I love that. That sounds really cool. Um, Chris, it sounds to me that the experiments are definitely interesting, and the research projects that you work on are super duper interesting. Not just your current research, but also your past research. Whatever little interactions we have had, it was always fascinating for me, the different research projects that you worked on. So this is a tough question. I know this before asking this to you, but if you have to pick one research project that you're most proud of, or the most fun or quirky one, could you pick one and explain it to us in super simple words in the section we call "In Other Words"?
Yeah, so I guess the thing that springs to mind is something that I was doing a few years ago at the end of my PhD. And what I like particularly about it is this is really a project I was there from the ground up for. So we built the lab. I was doing that together with another PhD student at the time, working on the laser and the ultra high vacuum stuff to put together this big setup. But then the project that I was particularly excited about at that time was nanowires. So single atom wires on a semiconducting substrate, which underwent one of these phase transitions between a metal and an insulator. And what we wanted to do was understand, like I said, how the electrons distribute themselves, how these behaviors change after photoexcitation. And so we tried this with our setup. And it worked out very nicely, actually. We got very nice data. And the really nice thing that came out of that was that we could understand the electronic structure changes. That was kind of the goal. But we could actually translate that into an ultra-fast kind of bonding picture, so that you could imagine, instead of having a picture where you have like a real space, atoms moving around in some way, you could have that as well. But on top of that, you'd have the orbitals, have the electronic distributions and their strengths kind of encoded in like a color scale, for example,
Mm-hmm.
and how these were changing during a reaction, basically, a chemical reaction or a structural reaction. And so we could kind of make this movie idea again, of how these orbitals, how these electronic bonds changed, and how their strength changed on these really short time scales. And for me, that was something that was really quite nice, to have that kind of microscopic and detailed view into something so kind of fundamental. And we all study bonds and we've heard about them at university or at school or wherever, but having that kind of dynamic picture of how they rearrange and how they form that was really interesting for me.
That sounds super interesting. So, which nanowires were you studying?
So this was something we grew ourselves in the lab here. Actually, it was just wires of indium, elemental indium, which they self-assemble into like a 1D wire structure on silicon surfaces.
Okay.
So that was something we could prepare in our lab here just by evaporating indium atoms onto a silicon surface and then doing a kind of annealing process to get a long range homogeneity in the samples.
Okay, interesting. I hope you talk about it when you're taking over the account.
Yes.
If you have a movie, that would be even better.
Yeah.
You have a movie? No way.
Yeah, so the title of the paper was actually Beyond the Molecular Movie. And we have these movies that we can show of the electronic structure or these bonds moving around. Those are a bit more cartoonish, but
That's
still
okay.
based on real calculations based on our real data.
Okay. Do you always go with these kinds of like fun titles for your scientific papers?
No, not always. I mean, it's not always so easy to have something kind of so overarching, let's say.
Right.
Sometimes it has to be a bit more specific, and then it maybe doesn't sound as fun, even though it's more useful. But at least for talks and for presentations, I like to have this kind of more fun aspect to kind of grab people's attention, because scientists, we're humans too, and we like to have things that are simple and easy to understand sometimes as well.
Yes, definitely. You have a knack for science communication. I see that. You should do it more often.
Okay, well, thank you.
Excellent. So it's clear to me, Chris, from talking to you, that you really love the research aspect of being a scientist. But there are also other aspects of you or other things that you have to do, other parts of being a scientist. So what else do you like about being a scientist other than the research itself?
Yeah, so as you say, there's really a lot of stuff that we have to do as scientists, and honestly, for me, that is the thing that keeps me motivated. The fact that you're not just doing one thing every day for months at a time. So I mean, maybe sometimes you go to the lab in the morning or the afternoon, but the other part of the day, you have to prepare a talk, write a paper, you have a call with some collaborators, you discuss ideas. It's a very dynamic and active kind of existence as a scientist. So you have many of these things which are arriving in front of you and you have to deal with, which of course can be challenging sometimes when a lot of them happen at once. But that really stimulates me a lot, and I absolutely love that aspect of it. That there's so many things happening that you can interact with, engage with. Kind of related to that is the number of people that you get to interact with. So I mean, we go to experiments sometimes, in Germany, Switzerland, the UK, sometimes the US, and there you're meeting people that have completely different, maybe cultural or educational backgrounds. Maybe people are coming from chemistry, biology, physics, but you're all working together on this one project, and you all can interact and learn from each other. And for me, that's a super exciting aspect of our work, that we have that kind of personal connection so often.
Okay. Okay, interesting. And you also mentioned you like writing. Are you still on that, or
Yeah, no, I mean, for me, I mean, I don't really separate it out from the research part in a sense because that's absolutely part of it. I mean, your work in the lab is one facet of research, but another one is preparing results, analyzing them, and writing out conclusions in a way that can be disseminated to the scientific community.
right?
So yeah, I absolutely include it under the umbrella of research, and one of the aspects that I enjoy about my scientific job is writing because it's your chance to kind of put down a nice story and tell people about your work and why is it interesting, what did you find,
Mhm.
and how is it relevant to the scientific community. So for me, that kind of engagement with other people, even though you're alone at your computer writing it yourself, I mean, you can kind of imagine that you're interacting with other people through this medium, basically.
Right, that is correct. That is amazing. That's really really cool, and it. I am getting the impression that I'm talking to a very mature sort of a scientist. So.
Oh, thank you.
So, what advice would you give either to yourself, if you were to go back in time, or students who are starting out today their scientific journey? What advice would you give mature scientist person?
So I absolutely do not want to give the impression that I am somehow knowledgeable in any of the things that I might think to say in terms of advice. It's really just my own experiences, of course. I think that this would go for myself if I was going to talk to my younger self, and definitely to other people who are maybe starting off on their scientific journey. But I would say that people tend to come with a lot of motivation and they're very excited to do scientific research, and that's absolutely wonderful and great. But I think it's probably good that we occasionally bring our heads up and look around at what's going on in the world around us. And what I mean by that is looking at other aspects of your life, whether that's your personal life for your own mental health, or whether it's your professional life, thinking about what it is that you actually want to do, where it is that you want to do it, and why it is that you like those things. And I think a lot of us in the academic world, at least, maybe we've always had the idea that we would be researchers or something related to that. But of course, for many people, the reality is it's very difficult to maintain that with family life or with the job that you actually want to do, rather than the one that you are maybe currently doing as part of academia.
Mhm.
And I think it's probably worth from an early stage looking at what skills you can get from, for example, a PhD position, and seeing how that can be applied to the wider world. If that's something that you might be interested in, look from an early stage at what those options would be. So go and talk to people at companies, go and talk to people who do research careers, gather information so that you can make an informed decision for yourself about where it is that you want to go, what it is that you want to do, and that you're using your skills and your time in a way that is most productive to you for sure, but also that makes you feel happy and lets you enjoy your life. So yeah, basically get information and inform yourself about what your options are and what it is that you really enjoy, and not to get too focused down on science, which can of course be very exciting and very interesting, but it's just one part of life.
Right. Also, like a broader, have a broader view of sorts.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's actually a very good advice. And you are a mature scientist. I mean, Chris, come on, don't be so humble. You are. I wouldn't say you're like super senior scientist, but you have gathered a lot of experience in the
This is
world of
true for sure.
science
Yeah.
so far, from different labs. So your advice or your thoughts are definitely valuable and useful for, especially for people who are starting out or looking at changing um, labs or different career paths probably, or whatever they have to do. So very very fine piece of advice, I must say. um, Chris, I hope your research experience has been wonderful so far. I mean, it sounds like it has been wonderful. Of course, I don't know all the stories, and hope it will continue to be wonderful in the future. However, if you had 3 wishes to improve your research experience, what would you ask for? And I'm not promising anything here, okay?
You're not promising anything. I was told there would be changes made.
Effective immediately.
Yeah, exactly. No, of course. So I don't know if the thoughts that I had were not so much for my own career trajectory, because I mean this is happening now, but I don't know if it can be really changed in the past. Anyway, the thoughts I had were more for kind of structural changes, and I know quite a few people on your podcast have talked about some of these things, so I'm not necessarily giving completely novel thoughts, but at least put my own spin on it. And the first thing, and I think it really is, it's a big stumbling block for science generally, and that is contracts and contract lengths. I don't think we have a quick solution to this. This is something really structural at a very high level that we have to deal with. But I would love to see more stable positions in science, not just at kind of high professor levels, but also research assistants, maybe teaching staff as well. Because one of the challenges that I think we have as scientists is, yeah, sure, we have this variety of work which can maybe be quite stimulating, but at the same time, not everybody is as good a researcher as they are a teacher, or is really wonderful at preparing lectures or this kind of stuff. So I think we have a bit of a need for diversification of job types in the scientific community, where people can really specialize a bit on one thing while still doing others, and to have that available from a younger age and not wait until you're 40 or something to finally get a permanent position. Of course, this is an expensive thing for society as a whole, but that would be my wish. So that's the wish number one. Wish number two would be kind of related, but more about realistic work expectations. So the fact that we have these diverse jobs tends to mean, from what I can tell, that you're expected to do all of them brilliantly all the time.
Absolutely, yes.
And that means not just publishing very high level research, but also having given maybe a lecture series, having developed teaching materials yourself, doing outreach, and these things already, I mean, they take up so much time that I think it would be reasonable to say to young scientists, okay, well, at this stage in your career, you should focus on this thing, and it's fine if you don't focus on this other thing so much. And as you progress, then it's clearer what you should be doing in order to progress. Which brings me to my third point, this idea of an actually structured scientific career. Because at the moment, you can do PhD and a postdoc somewhere, you can have wonderful experiences, but they're not necessarily comparable to what you get from somewhere else, for example. That's kind of part of the beauty of it, that you have this very organic and individual experience. But in terms of developing both scientists and also people who will eventually leave science and go work in industry, we don't really have this kind of core set of things that we're setting out to teach people, or that we hope they have achieved by a certain point when they start taking on other responsibilities. For example, as a group leader, and when you suddenly have other people coming to you and saying, you need advice or help with something, and you're not necessarily trained for that, but you have to work it out somehow. Right. So it would be great for me to see a little bit more structure. And some places do this. There is definitely a move in this direction, but I'd like to see it kind of more evenly spread, more evenly available.
Right.
So those are my thoughts.
Okay, that's very interesting. I mean, yes, this has been mentioned, as you said, a couple of times on the podcast, as the wish list from our guests, so to say. But the way you put it, yeah, that's also a different way of looking at it. Be it the diversification of the different tasks that one has to do, and finding your expertise and finding space or jobs for teaching or for supervising, for research or writing or whatever it is. That's definitely a different way of approaching it, and I hope that it becomes there is more structure in the science careers, in terms of contracts, in terms of the career growth as well. I mean, exactly what you said. So far, it's like master's, PhD, postdoc, postdoc 1, postdoc 2, postdoc 3, it can go on forever.
Yeah.
But there needs to be some sort of structure there, some sort of like a, structure. How? I don't know.
Me
We
neither.
don't know. But I'm sure we will figure it out. And you being now a group leader, a very mature scientist, I'm not saying it sarcastically, okay? I mean it. I truly mean it. It's great to know that we have active researchers like you who are thinking like this, who have this in the back of their mind that we need a different kind of a structure. We need things to change to make like manage expectations. And so on and so forth. Because if you, for example, speaking about your second point, the human expectations and not this superpower sort of expectations. If you work on weekends and your students are like, oh, Chris is working, my PI is working on the weekends, I guess I have to work as well.
Right, exactly, yeah.
So, yeah, you break the cycle, break the chain. Is that what it is called?
Yes, I'm being put on the spot now. I think break the cycle.
Sorry,
Yeah.
break the cycle. Yeah, you break the cycle. That oh, my supervisor did that, or people around me did that, so I will also work on weekends and throw my personal life in the bin. And it's work life. Science is my work. Like science is my life and
Exactly.
everything.
That's not
So
a healthy attitude.
no, it might be for the sprints, but if you're in it for the long term as a marathon for like months, so then it's not going to work. But yeah, this has been wonderful, Chris. Before I let you go, though, I have one last question for you, and that is, of course, when we are recording a podcast in the pandemic, we cannot let the researchers leave before they share their learnings from the very interesting times that we are living in with masks and all the pandemic. Of course, that's what I'm talking about, which started 2 years ago. So, what are your learnings from the year 2020, 2021? Because now we are in 2022.
That's true. Okay, so what did I learn in 2020? Well, probably quite a lot of things, but the one that really stuck out when I was thinking about this was this this expression in English about keeping your friends close and your enemies closer, which is a bit of a negative. The whole thing is a bit negative, but what stuck in my mind was this first bit: keep your friends close. And I think for me, this was really the thing that came out from the pandemic in a way that I didn't expect, because having lived abroad now for quite a few years, I of course have friends and family spread around the world now, and keeping in contact with them was always, some effort with online communication and so on. But suddenly during the pandemic, everybody was doing this, and it actually made it a lot easier to keep in touch with people who maybe I only saw once or twice a year, because now everybody was saying, oh, well, we're anyway meeting online with people, so let's do that. And so the combination of this and, of course, lockdown being a fairly isolating time for everybody really it really highlighted the fact that you should absolutely keep the people who make you smile, who you enjoy spending time with, as close to you as possible. And of course, with COVID in mind, that I am speaking figuratively. I don't mean physically close necessarily, but as close as you can make it, such that it feels like you still have an actual connection with people. So for me, that was really highlighted during this pandemic time.
Right. Okay. Well, that's a very, very good learning, I would say, and I relate to that. Keeping your friends close, closest, so to say, to stay away from the original part. But yeah, this is really that's true. I think a lot of us can relate to what you're learning. Thank you very much, Chris. Looking forward to having you on Real Scientist Nano. I enjoyed our conversation a lot. I learned a lot, and I'm really excited to see all the pictures and the advices, especially about the writing and stuff. I know you're not going to share the tips and all of that, but still, yes. Thank you.
I can make it a fun week for people.
It's going to be great. So thank you, and see you on Twitter then.
Thank you for having me, Pranoti. See you later.
Thank you for listening. This is Pranoti, host of Under the Microscope. To know more about us, visit our website, thesciencetalk.com, and follow us on Twitter at realsci_nano.